Hello, CIS27. In this video, I'm going to talk about Unit 6 Lab, which entails social engineering tactics and exploits. So once you click on the lab page, you can click on the link that will take you to practice lab. Make sure that we allow pop-up and make sure that we complete all tasks and click done when you're finished. So once we access practice lab, general page, you can see that we have 3 exercises. The first 2 exercises, it basically goes over the concept, very similar to what is discussed in the notes in the book. The last exercise is where you would perform reconnaissance, which is to gather information that would be the beginning step for pen testing or attacking. So the hands-on exercise would be exercise 3, whereas the first couple exercise would be covering general concept that you will have to read over. So after you look at the objectives and the exam objectives for the certification, this lab is to last about an hour. You can go to the next page. The next page simply just gives you the general lab layout. So in the first exercise, it talks about social engineering, and this is an art of manipulation. It uses human behavior to conduct security breach. In social engineering, the victim who is being used as a subject for security breach. So what you see in the diagram here, it shows you psychology, manipulation, and misdirection that leads to social engineering. They can do it over the phone, in person, or to perform tasks on the system. Usually they pretend to be receptionists, help desk, and so some of these are going to be the common target. They might call the individual and pretend that they're IT help desk and ask that person to perform a certain task. But often you would see that they also target top management because top management individual would have access to system or escalated privilege. And in this section, it talks about phishing and the phishing process. So phishing is a type of attack that uses social engineering. It's used to obtain passwords, social security numbers, sensitive information. Phishing can be conducted by meeting in person, via malicious website, or via email. So there are different types of phishing. There's smishing, which is a type of voice phishing or vishing. And this is a social engineering attack with text messages and text using SMS, so it's called smishing. And so an individual might receive a text message that requests that person to fill out a form, so that way that person can give away the sensitive information. Vishing with the V is a form of voice phishing. This is conducted over telephone, and the person would receive a call from banker, financial institution, IRS, etc. And that phone call would attempt to obtain personal information for the receiver, of the receiver. Watering hole is a complex phishing attack in that websites are infected with malware, and malware is used to infiltrate the system or to obtain sensitive information. Whaling is a form of phishing or spear phishing attack where it addresses executives, CEOs, CIOs, high-level manager in the organization. Farming is with the PH is a phishing attack where the user is directed to a fake website that looks like a real website, And once they get redirected, they simply would be enticed to input information that would be sensitive, their credential, social security number, etc. And that is called farming. Now, the DNS cache is poison, so the real IP address is mapped to a legitimate URL, then it would be changed. So that IP address is redirected the user to the malicious website. Spear phishing would target a specific group or set of companies, and the attacker would set up tactics to encourage the user to give away specific details via emails, messages, or website. But spear phishing would mainly focus on specific group of individual compared to regular phishing. So there are three key methods in phishing. There's mass mailing, instant messages, and malicious website. And mass mailing coming in from email. So if you filter spam, you will likely filter out some of the mass email. In addition, if we manage the security on our mobile devices and our system for instant messages, so instant messages now sometimes can include files, but they can drop in malicious URL via instant messages. Malicious website can be used to lure people to give away information. So the phishing process include the following: initiation, execution, user action, and completion. So the first stage is initiation, where the attacker prepares for an attack, where they would study and learn and gather as much information about the target as possible. Execution is where the attacker sends out email, messages to thousands and hundreds of users, hoping that some of the user would respond. User action, this is when the user receive the messages, they would click on the link, or they would download the attachment, fill out, it might keylog them, or they might fill out some information on the website. The last stage is completion, so the information that is entered by the user that would then be received by the attacker. So by the end of the fourth stage, you would see that phishing attack, the attacker can use additional methods for other form of attacks in order to move forward with gaining data or negatively impacting the organization, such as man-in-the-middle, session hijack, phishing through search engines, etc. So here you can see different form of attack methods, and those can be used in the phishing attack or after the phishing attack. The reason why that phishing is very successful is most users they don't have the complete knowledge. So there's a lack of knowledge in user, or they're not trained. There's visual deception that the attackers smartly use domain names and URL that looks legitimate or duplicate the legitimate website. Visual indicator, the users mostly do not pay attention to the URL or the domain name. Therefore, they fall into the victim of the phishing attack. In exercise 2, it talks about social engineering principle. And in this, you don't need to have virtual machines. You simply, again, read through. So just to summarize it real quick, social engineering motivation techniques, like what we talked about earlier, but they would use authority where the attacker pretend to be some individual that has authority, like law enforcement. And they also use scarcity or urgency to encourage the user to make quick decision and not think about the decision making process. Social proof is used when the victim does not know how to deal with, so the victim decides by observing other, and the attacker would try to convince the victim by social proofing. By fear, if the attacker uses fear to make the victim do what they want, so the victim is forced to quickly make the decision to avoid dangerous outcome. So they might get threats, or in the case if you receive an IRS call and you don't want to pay tax, right? It's a fake call, but you don't want to owe money, then you would call them back and give away the information. Intimidation, simply intimidate or force the target into doing or making a choice. And they would use impersonation technique for intimidation. Consensus, the attacker can use rogueware, malware, and add fake reviews or testimony of people on there so that way it seems convincing to the victim or the target. Familiarity, in which the attacker becomes your friend, gain trust, and the attacker would convince you to do something such as provide information. And ultimately, trust can be established over time. And so once you start trusting the individual and believe, then you would be convincing to share information or to commit to a certain action based on the trust. Next, it talks about typo swatting. And typo swatting is a method of using real lookalike URL. It might look like Google, but in the domain name, it's slightly different. And if the user is not careful, they might fall into a victim of typo swatting. And this website might be delivering malware to the system. Hoax, bait, shoulder surfing, and tailgating are additional methods of social engineering. Hoax they use tactics to draw the victim interest and warn the victim in certain consequences, and they're just fake. So a computer hoax that's generated on the internet via email. Shoulder surfing, looking over someone's shoulder for credit card number, passwords, etc. Baiting is an attack of using media like USB, CD, DVD. And when that mostly USB drives can be hidden with malware, and they can be placed in the area where people would find them. They would then plug it into their system, and the malware would then be downloaded to the system. Tailgating is following someone into the office or sensitive area or locked area, restricted area without having access keys. Dumpster diving is a social engineering attack that uses physical method to access useful information that has been disposed in the dumpster or the recycle container. They can look for IDs, password, email, bank account, social security number, etc. And so that means that we have to shred documents that could hold sensitive information. We should also dispose electronic media appropriately. And we want to make sure that we wipe storage drives before we dispose them. Spam is unwanted email. And spam is a method in which unknown sender sends a large number of unsolicited email to many users. So some source of addresses from websites, customer lists, news group, social media, etc. would be used for sending these messages. Spam is like spam, in which spam would use instant messaging. And so instant messengers like WhatsApp can be victim of spam, that anyone can send a message to the mobile user unless they look. So spam occur real time, and it could embed malicious files in the message. Identity theft is where victims' identities are used by attacker for personal gain or for access. Could be credential, sensitive information, bank account, driver license, etc. Invoice scams. Invoice scams is the trick in which attacker extract money from corporate by sending fake invoice. Invoice would look like the organization logo, it has name, address, and so people would fall victim to the fake invoice and send checks or pay bill on that website where it's not real. Credential harvesting is that it would use account harvesting for password harvesting. So they would try to gain information about account information, username, account number, password, and they can use that to sell in the dark web for money. Influencing campaigns is designed to influence people. A lot of the time it's for political motive. And the intentions is, it could include intentions for cyber warfare. Tweets, messages, social media influencing would fall under influencing campaigns. Impersonation is an act of pretending to be someone else. So the attacker would use fake identity, and the attacker would gain the trust of the victim so that way they can obtain confidential information. Eliciting information is a method where they can extract information from the target, and in that they would use flattery, false statement, artificial ignorance, bracketing, or safe environment. Now in exercise 3 is the hands-on portion where you would perform reconnaissance. And this is also known as footprinting. This is a way that we can collect information about a target. And for many people that begin to get into cybersecurity, people would use Kali Linux as it would have the appropriate tool. This is the first phase in the foundation of attack. So where can we find the information for Recon? We can find it through web searches, looking at live system and networks, looking at network traffic, identify ports so we can scan the ports, looking at operating system version, because that can give us vulnerability information. So footprinting is a way to collect information about a target, could be an organization passively. Scanning, active reconnaissance method, can use scanning like Nmap to extract network and systems. Enumeration usually done after footprinting and scanning. You can use information in different area, so you can try the information that you gain in different area to narrow down how you can exploit the vulnerability. So now what we would see is that you have these devices. So some of the terminology in the type of reconnaissance, you have 5 types: active, passive, pseudonymous, and internet and anonymous. So active is a method where you can directly interact with the system. So things like we can look at IP, port scan, zone transfer, fuzzing, social engineering. Where passive is that we don't interact with the system. We can look at search on Whois database. We would perform scraping from social network or extract DNS information, review blogs. So there's not direct interaction with the target system. Pseudonymous is a way that we can collect information under pseudonym or pseudonym. So the target uses this name so that the information about him or her cannot be traced back to them. So a group of attacker can use pseudonym like anonymous, so that way they are known as, and they're not known specifically as an individual. So in the internet section, it talks about collecting information with the target. And so you can look at specific database by looking at username and password like this, and it might give you additional information by looking at the logs there. So the tools that you can use for Recon are Whois, NSLOOKUP, Foca, Harvester, Shodan, Maltego. And keep in mind that some of these are web-based, some of them are Linux-based, some of them are Windows-based. So in Kali Linux include DNS analysis, IDS, IPS identification, live host, SMTP analysis. So Kali comes equipped with many tools like this. And it shows you different types of tools there. So from that on, after you go through, you would then perform the task 1. In this, you will query the DNS where you would do NSLOOKUP. So for this one, you would fire up the lab Kali Linux, and if it is slow, please be patient with it because sometimes it could perform pretty slow. You're going to log in as root. That's the highest user privilege It has the highest privilege as a user, and make sure that you use password with the 0. Then once you're in Kali, after you log in, it looks a little bit different than your Windows systems in that everything is at the top left. So then you would click on the terminal emulator, and terminal is a command line for the Kali Linux. Then you would type in NSLOOKUP. So we can look up the domain name like this, practicelab.com. You can do NSLOOKUP for most domain, and some domain they choose to have it hidden, so that way even when you look it up, it won't be able to show. Then after that, what you will do is you will note the DNS server address. So when you gather the information from the NSLOOKUP, you want to record this information so that way you can use it for later purposes, coming from a perspective of the attacker, of course. We can also look at the DNS record. So for the A record, you can do NSLOOKUP type A, and it would give you additional information. Now, like I said, some specific domain like Facebook or Instagram, sometimes they would hide these things where it would show that you will have to contact a certain organization or it's been blocked. So not all company would allow you to do NSLOOKUP. And then we can look up SOA records. So here you would then issue the SOA. After that, you can look up the type A with debug. So when you use the debug parameter, what that allows you to do is it's going to give you additional information with the authority records and additional records along with the address and the common NSLOOKUP. Then you can look for the MX record, which is for mail exchange. So most organizations would have some form of mail exchange. So if there is a mail server, it would list it. If not, it would show nothing there. Cannot find it. So that usually the first part is to really look at the domain information and gather more information about their server systems. So this is what you're doing here. Then after you have performed the NSLOOKUP with the address, with the URL, and obtaining some details, you can also set the timeout wait, where if you don't want to wait for a certain length of time, you can set that there. Then we can query any of the records by doing query equal any. So by using the argument with the command, you're able to also pull up additional information that you didn't previously put in. So for example, that would give you like what the screenshot showed there. Then in task 2, you're going to use Recon NG. This is an open source framework that's using Python. And scripting is important in security, in that many of the modules and the tools that's written in Python being incorporated with the suite of tools that you see in the common OS like Kali Linux for pen testing, or if it is So a lot of the attack tools or the pen testing tool you see is written in Python using Python library. So the modules are divided into auxiliary, contact, host, output, and for the peon list. So in this, what you would see is that when you use Kali Linux, you would use the terminal, and most of the tools, like I mentioned, you would use command line. So in order to execute the application that's already been installed, you simply type in the application name recon-ng. Then it will launch, and it would have the interface like this. Then you can type in help to get additional command information. So the list of command is shown after you input help and press enter. Then next you would install a module, hacker target. So using this application, then you can add a module called hacker target. So you would install it. Then you can load that module by issuing modules load hacker target in the command line. Then you would set the source, which is going to be practice labs. So here we would include the source option. So after you have set the source domain, then you would type in run, and you would get some form of output. So here it shows you the practice lab information and the domain for the practice lab and the IP address. Then to exit, you can type in exit to close that application. In task 3, you would use Harvester. In this, we can obtain email accounts, username, host names, subdomains, and banners. So again, you will be using Kali Linux. So if you have fired the virtual machine up, you can keep it open, and you can also use terminal. So in the terminal, you can open up the application by typing in its name, the harvester. And here you use option or the parameter D, that stands for domain name. And you would then follow that up with the domain. The L parameter would give you the number of the results. So we want 500. And the B parameter is used as the source information. It's going to pull it from a search engine. So what we're doing here is we're going to harvest information for the domain practicelab.com, and we're going to get that from the search engine Google. So after you execute that, it would give you the results, and it would show up with some email addresses. So once it's displayed that, you can take a look at the output and the host information. Then in task 4, you would then identify live hosts on the network. And again, you would be using Kali Linux. So in Kali, if you already have it open, you just use the terminal. And in this one, you would use Nmap. Nmap is for the Linux version, and Zenmap is for the Windows version. So you execute Nmap, but here you would use the SP parameter. This is going to do the ping scan for this IP address. And the CIDR24 basically going to scan 256 IP addresses for that network. So it would relate to this network and 256 addresses under that network. So we can use the CIDR with the IP version 4. So once you issue that, it would scan and it would give you the details on each of the target. Then you would again use Nmap, and in this one you use the SN option. And in step 5, you would then do trace route. So you would scan, but following the traffic for that network. Okay, so you would follow it to different hops for the router where it gets routed. So here it shows you, and Nmap is really good at in displaying what port is open, what kind of services is used in that port, and when it traces, it's going to show how many hop or router that traffic is being passed through. Then you will then scan the live host using the IP address range. So here we scan 192.168.0 through 192.168.04. So that means that we scan from the system with the .1, .2, .3, and .4. Okay, so you can do a range of system that way too. So once you receive, you would get also a list of open ports and related services. Then you can use a wildcard to scan using the asterisk, which is a wildcard. And this will also scan that subnet. In task 5, you will be performing discovery. And here you would then do ping scan, ARP scan, and port scan. So again, you would keep using Kali Linux and terminal. You would use Nmap. And in step 2, you would see ICMP request, which is a ping. So in the last step, you would do ping scan, and you would notice that ICMP is the service for ping. Then step 3, you're going to do an ARP scan. And notice that it talks about that here. If the target system responds to ARP request, it means it's alive. Unlike ping scan, it is not blocked by the firewall in most cases. So ARP would request for the subnet, so you would then using ARP scan by doing -PR. Then next, you are going to use the SN parameter. This is used to detect port for using Nmap. So here, like what you've seen earlier, here we can just simply look at open port by doing the SN. And then in step 5, you're going to do a -P with the Nmap. This also allows you to look at the ports. And here we can look at specific port, like port 80. So if you want one specific port, you can do a -P and put in the port number. So if I want port 22, I would do a -P22. And then for step 7, you are going to send message, because for TCP, it needs to have acknowledgement because it's a 3-way handshake. So we can look at the type of port that uses TCP, and we can see if there's a synchronization and acknowledgement. In step 8, you are going to do a PS80 command. And that simply is going to look at the port for this subnet and to look at the send messages. Task 6, again, you would filter or perform port scan and then filter. So you then again use Nmap, and we can scan specific system with the IP like this. So in this one, you would use Kali, terminal, Nmap, and you would scan for the net 192.168.0.2. Now you would see that there are several ports that's going to be open. Port 80, which is for HTTP. Then we also see port 139 and 3389. So if you want to scan specific port, like port 22, that happens in step 3, where you use Nmap and you would use -P with a port number 22 and the IP address. So here we are looking for SSH for that particular system. This allows us to narrow down on specific port for specific system. Now, if you wanted to do a range, you can also do a -P with the port range from 1 through 100 by using 1-100 and the IP address. So that would scan all ports between 1 through 100 for that specific system. In task 6, we would scan for DNS, which is port 53 and also port 88. Now, if you wanted to do fast scan, step 7 shows you how to do fast scan by using option -F. And that will give you 100 common ports with the fast scan. That is open. And in step 9, you will scan 65,535 ports by doing -P-. That would be all ports, including common and uncommon ports. That's a lot. In step 10, you would use ST to scan TCP connect. And in all our traffic, we would use TCP for connection-oriented connection-oriented protocol, and then IP is used for connectionless, which is the address. So when you use ST, that allows you to port scan using TCP connect. And in step 12, that's going to scan 1,000 ports, and you can filter them to the open ports. Okay. If you wanted to scan UDP, then you would do an SU. Unlike TCP, you would do ST. And here you can specify the ports that you wanted to scan under UDP. So it filters it out when you specify the ports instead of giving you all the open ports in from the Nmap result. And in step 14, it shows that there are 3 ports based on the filter that we had set previously for the UDP in the last step. Then in step 15, we're going to scan for top ports, and we wanted to specify the top 10 ports for that system. So you can specify the number of top ports that you wanted to look at. And then task 7, you would fingerprint the system. And again, we would use Nmap. And we use the option O parameter for operating system. So we can look at the version of the operating system that this particular IP is using, or the system is using. Or if you wanted to do -O-OS scan, this will detect the operating system, and it also provide the closest signature. So if we know that it's a Windows or it's a Linux system, it's going to give you that information. And with the option A, we would use the option A to be able to perform the fingerprint of the OS. Now, passive fingerprint, so when you use Nmap, it is non-passive, it is active. In the passive, so you can use P0F, and this tool, I'm a little too far. We can evaluate the signatures. So when it generates it, it's going to put the signature into a file, and we have to go to that file, which is located in the etc directory under its directory to find the information. So you would then visit the web browser using Firefox. You would then generate the web traffic. So once you do that, it's going to capture the data and put that information into a file. So here it shows you the server information, the details. So this is a way that it can capture the information, but you have to generate the traffic in order to do so. So after you complete all the tasks, you can review the summary and provide the feedback, but also don't forget to click done when you're finished. And this concludes my Lab 6 video. It gives you the preview on how to complete your lab, and it explains some of the details and the concept in phishing, in malware, in social engineering, and ultimately we touch on using Kali Linux for reconnaissance and fingerprinting. Thank you for watching my video.